Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's show. This is High Strangeness in the Liminal Abyss, and I am your show host, SHETAN NOIR. Well, my curious ones, how are we doing this week? I know I am looking forward to my dream trip next week to Tucson for the gigantic world's biggest gem show. I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to it. And I can't wait to maybe take you guys along. Maybe I can post some clips of the trip, but we'll definitely be 2 weeks from now, we'll definitely be doing show and tell. I will be showing you guys the gorgeous stuff that I got while I was there, talking about my adventure and where my travels take me while I'm in Arizona. But for this week's broadcast, I had two interesting topics come up in interviews this week. One for a film crew and one for a podcast interview that I was doing. And the topic of humanoid DNA and genetics came up. Now, one of the ones that I'm going to nitpick was there was a person who supposedly had collected Sasquatch slash Bigfoot DNA and had it researched, sent it to a lab supposedly, and the report came back half human, half primate. Well, that's the voices that be disagreeing with that statement, growling about it. Um, the problem with that statement is that human beings are primates. So the analysis report, if it came back half human, half primate, 50% each, would be inaccurate. Because genetically, there is a very tiny percentage of difference between human DNA and chimpanzee DNA. It's so tiny that, well, people would really be surprised at how minute the difference in percentage of DNA markers there are. So I have to question this supposed lab result and have to question whether the person was making it up. Maybe they don't understand genetics. I have a good grasp of genetics because, and don't boo and hiss, but for a long time, I bred and showed dogs. And the breed of dog that I showed, there was a certain formula you had to follow if you wanted different colors other than red or black and tan. Many of you know I have miniature pinchers and have had them most of my adult life. I would say since I was probably 20 years old. So for over 20 years, I've had miniature pinchers. So with genetics in any species, you cannot breed a human being to a wolf and get a werewolf. Sorry, it does not work that way. The same thing with chimpanzees and great apes. Now, there were experiments done in the 1800s by Russian scientists where they were trying to breed to create a super army, trying to breed human females with primates such as chimpanzees. And this was before the bonobo was uh, actually even realized as a real species. The bonobo is kind of the branching species in between your smaller great apes or your smaller apes and chimpanzees. They look very similar to both. But there was an attempt made to impregnate human women with chimpanzee semen. It was never successful. The scientist who was trying to do it couldn't even perform these experiments in Russia. That's how risque they were. He had to go to a third world country and be in a uh, facility and try to do this. Now, there were human females who agreed to this experimentation and agreed to being impregnated by the chimpanzee semen. But as far as we know, as far as scientific reports go, this was not successful. So we can rule out the interbreedings of human beings, modern day human beings, with wild chimpanzees, wild apes, wild bonobos, wild silverback gorillas, wild orangutans. Um, we can rule those out because it's just not going to happen. Very similar to how a fox, even though it is a canine, looks like a canine, you cannot breed a fox to, let's say, something similar in appearance, like maybe a Finnish Spitz or a large Pomeranian, a Keys Hound, maybe. Genetically, they are just not compatible. You can breed a dog, like a husky or a Malamute, to a Siberian husky or a timber wolf or gray wolf, and get wolf dogs. There's also coy dogs, which are coyote regular dog mixes. And we see this a lot with like German Shepherd type, looking dogs that are very similar in appearance. Um, This can also be done by dingoes with regular dogs. The dingoes are actually only a couple generations removed from Australian cattle dogs and blue heelers and red heelers and those sorts. Change the color, and it's a dingo. You train them, and it's an Australian cattle dog. Yeah, grasp that one. So, this concept of Bigfoot DNA or Sasquatch DNA being half human, half primate is really a red flag because it would not show up as that. It would show up as 100% primate, species unknown. And it would be unknown because we have the genetic markers that distinguish human from chimpanzee, from bonobo, from great ape, from silverback gorilla, orangutans. We have all those genetic markers because scientists, biologists, DNA geneticists have access through zoos to those specimens to get samples to create the helifex for the genetic map. What we don't have is viable DNA from a living, breathing Sasquatch or Bigfoot or Dogman or Mothman or any of these cryptid creatures. And that's where finding and capturing the live individual becomes very, very important because it can be documented that this zoo or this country has a captive member of this species. Scientists from around the world, biologists from around the world, geneticists from around the world should be given universal access to any findings and any test results or tests that are run on it need to be publicly accessed so that there is no hoaxing. There is no mismanagement of information, that it is readily available and under scrutiny by everyone. And when we have that information, that's when we can compare where the Sasquatch fits into the primate family tree. Because we have the fossil record that says, okay, we have these little tiny primates all the way up to the human being primate. Somewhere in there, the Bigfoot should fit in. Now, Dogman is a different scenario because we don't have anything in the fossil record that says a upright walking canine similar in height and possible weight to a Bigfoot or Sasquatch should exist. But once again, the DNA results from any specimen collected will not be half human, half canine. That's not how it works because that would mean you had a human being who either impregnated a canine and this was the offspring, or vice versa. A human being who was impregnated by a canine and this was the resulting offspring. It's not how it works. It's the eggs and the sperm from both species are not compatible to produce an offspring. Now, we're not going to go into genetic splicing of genes and how it could be manufactured because that is a laboratory process. And somebody has to admit to either financing and agreeing to that research taking place or has to be the one doing the research. And that really brings in a lot of moral and ethical questions of, is this a person or is this an animal? So I don't think mankind, human beings, are ready to have that debate yet. We still want to recognize these creatures as being just that, creatures, monsters that lurk out in the darkness waiting for us. But for anything to be half human, half whatever else, there has to be a breeding of those two different species, whether it's human and canine, human and fish, human and insect for Mothman. We just don't know. Now, that does not mean that these are not extraterrestrial or interdimensional creatures. Because what applies in our reality, in our dimension, on our world, is probably different than what takes place in other planets, other dimensions. There's all sorts of possibilities out there. So, as far as my understanding of genetics, human DNA, primate DNA, DNA of other species, anybody who's claiming that they have test results from specimens or evidence that's been found, and they say that it's 50% human or 75% human and the rest is such and such, I have to call nonsense on because that is impossible. That is not how genetics work. Otherwise, we'd have a much different world of humans being the host species for other species to breed to and produce humanoids, scalenoids, dogmen, insectivoids, other intelligent primates. I just don't see it happening. So people can disagree with me, people can agree with me, but that is my take on the whole concept of people claiming that test results for this genetic material say 50% human, 50% primate or canine or whatever. The only way that's going to happen is if, when that evidence was collected, proper protocol was not followed and human DNA contaminated it, whether the person coughed on it, sneezed on it, touched it with their bare fingers, that can contaminate evidence. So I'm done with my lecture. And remember, next week, no show, but the week after, show and tell, because I'm going to show you all the pretties that I got while I was in Tucson. So until next time, stay curious out there and go explore our world. Have a good night.